I still remember the day they turned their backs on me. 63 years of life, 30 of them devoted to my family. And in the end, I was left with nothing but $50, a faded floral dress, and a heart that felt like broken glass in my chest. People think betrayal comes with screaming, with slammed doors. Mine came in silence. In the way my own son looked at me like I was a burden. In the way my daughter-in-law smirked when I spoke of dreams too small for her world. Even friends I trusted whispered behind my back, as if my grief was something to mock. I stand here now, hands rough from work, apron worn thin, the smell of fresh bread clinging to me, not because anyone helped me, but because I learned to rise from ashes alone. And this is the story of how I turned $50 and a fragile dream into a life no one believed I could build. And how one day, the same people who doubted me came to ask me for a job. I used to think love was unbreakable, that blood meant loyalty. But grief has a way of stripping illusions bare. I remember that night like a scar etched on my mind. I stood in the kitchen of my own house, the same kitchen where I once cooked birthday cakes for my son Eduardo. The same walls that held laughter now echoed with something colder. Eduardo leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes hard. "Mom," he said, not looking at me fully, "you can't stay here forever. You're too much to handle right now." I clutched my apron with rough, flour-dusted fingers, my heart thudding. I had just buried his father, my husband of 36 years. My soul was raw, and yet my own child looked at me like I was an unwanted guest in my own home. Vanessa, his wife, sat on the couch, scrolling on her phone. She didn't even glance up when she said, "Maybe you should think about, I don't know, a retirement home or something. You can't just live off us forever." Her tone was sugar dipped in poison. I stood there in my faded floral dress, my hair tied in its messy bun, the old wedding ring heavy on my finger. My voice barely found its way out. "This is my family. I thought we'd hold each other through this." But Eduardo just sighed, annoyed, like my grief was an inconvenience. That was the night I understood I had no home anymore, not even among those I loved most. I left their house on a rainy Tuesday. The sky seemed to cry louder than I could. All I carried was a small suitcase, my faded floral dress clinging damp to my skin, the old wedding ring digging into my finger like a reminder of everything I'd lost. I took a bus to a tiny run-down flat on the edge of town, the kind of place where the paint peels off the walls and the only sound at night is leaking pipes and distant sirens. The smell of mildew clung to the curtains, but at least it was mine, and it was silent. The phone stayed quiet for days. No messages from Eduardo, no calls from Vanessa. Even my so-called friend, Bianca, the one who used to come over for coffee every Friday, didn't check in. Later I'd hear she told people I'd lost my mind, that I couldn't cope without my husband and would end up begging on the streets. My grandson, Lucas, barely 18, sent one message. "Grandma, stop saying you're going to open a bakery. People laugh at you. Just stop embarrassing us." I read it 3 times before setting the phone down, my eyes burning, my rough hands trembling. That night I sat on the small bed in that empty apartment. The window rattled from the storm outside. I stared at the $50 note on the nightstand, the last money I had to my name, and wondered if life had already ended for me, just without a funeral to mark it. But somewhere deep, past the grief and humiliation, a quiet, stubborn ember burned. I wasn't done yet. They could take away my home, my comfort, even their love, but they would not take away my will to stand up again. It was a Sunday morning when the idea truly took hold. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under the pale light. I stood in my tiny kitchen, if you could call it that. A chipped counter, a a single rusted burner, and a dented aluminum pot that had seen better days. I looked at the $50 note, worn soft from being folded and unfolded 100 times. My stomach ached from cheap instant noodles, my heart from something deeper. I whispered to myself, in Portuguese first, then in English, as if trying to believe it harder. I can make bread. I can make something good again. I tied my gray, wavy hair into its usual messy bun, pulled on my old apron stained from a life of cooking for others, and walked to the corner market. My rough, work-marked hands clutched the last of my coins as I bought flour, sugar, and a small bag of cheese. That afternoon, I mixed the dough slowly, almost prayerfully, my hazel eyes watching the ingredients come together like they were sewing pieces of my life back into place. The oven borrowed from the neighbor wheezed and clicked as I slid in the first tray of pão de queijo. The smell that filled that bleak apartment was the first warmth I had felt in weeks. When I sold those little cheese breads to 2 neighbors passing by, I earned just enough to buy more flour. One of them smiled and said, "These taste like home." For the first time since losing my husband, since being cast aside, my lips curved into a quiet, rare smile. My wedding ring caught the light as I handed over the warm paper bag, and I thought, maybe I can build something that's mine. Maybe I can rise again. The first weeks were brutal. I woke up at 4 every morning, tying my gray, wavy hair into a messy bun, slipping into the same faded pastel dress and my old beige apron. My hands, already rough from years of housework, cracked and burned from kneading dough for hours in the cold dawn. Each coin I earned, I saved. Flour, eggs, butter, always just enough to make the next batch. I'd walk to the market with my modest basket, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes lowered, because I still felt the weight of shame pressing down on me. But every time a neighbor's eyes lit up when they tasted my pão de queijo, I felt something rebuild inside me. A piece of dignity, a piece of Catarina, not just the abandoned mother or grieving widow, but the woman who once dreamed of creating something good. I remember one morning, exhausted, leaning against the cracked kitchen wall, hands white with flour. The window let in a sliver of sunlight, catching the old silver necklace I always wore, the only other thing I hadn't pawned. My hazel eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. I am not done yet, I whispered to myself. Vanessa's posts on social media showed her in cafes and shopping malls, tagging Eduardo in smiling pictures, as if their lives were untouched by my absence, each image cut like a knife. But instead of breaking me, they fueled me. I promised myself one thing. I will stand on my own 2 feet, even if I have to crawl there first. Weeks turned to months, and slowly, Catarina's Corner was born. Not yet a store, just a small reputation. People began knocking on my door, asking for bread, cakes, comfort. In their voices, I found something I hadn't heard in a long time. Respect. The smell of fresh bread became my alarm clock. I barely slept, maybe 3 hours a night, but I didn't care. My tiny apartment had turned into a bakery, bags of flour stacked in corners, trays cooling on every surface. My back ached, my hands were calloused and cracked, but I felt alive for the first time in years. One morning, while delivering a batch of cheese rolls to a local cafe, I caught my reflection in a shop window, a small gray-haired woman in a faded floral dress, apron dusted white, posture slightly bent from endless work. Yet there was a quiet fire in her hazel eyes, a stubborn refusal to disappear. But pain never stayed far behind. Some nights, when the orders were done, I sat alone at my wooden table, staring at my old wedding ring. My husband would have been proud, I thought. He would have believed in me when no one else did. The ache of missing him, of losing the home we built together, gnawed at me. And then there were the whispers. Bianca, the friend I once trusted, spread more gossip. She's desperate, they said, selling bread from a dirty apartment. Poor Katerina. Each word reached my ears like small stabs. Yet with every hurtful word, I rose earlier, worked harder. I began making simple cakes, pastries, little sweets that reminded people of their childhoods. Orders doubled. Strangers left money on my counter with soft smiles saying, "Your hands have magic, Senora." Each time someone said that, I stood a little straighter. My dream was still fragile, my life still lonely, but now it had purpose. And somewhere in the quiet hours of dawn, as I mixed dough with rough, aching hands, I made myself another promise. One day the people who doubted me will see what I've built, and they won't be laughing anymore. It started with a stranger knocking on my door at 6 a.m. A young man in a crisp shirt, holding a coffee cup, smiled and said, "My boss tasted your bread yesterday. He wants to place a regular order for his restaurant." For a moment I froze. My rough, flour-dusted hands trembled around the mixing bowl. Me? Supplying a restaurant? My heart raced faster than it had in years. By the end of that month, I was baking day and night, my small kitchen overflowing with trays of bread and pastries. My body screamed for rest, but my soul felt a fire it hadn't known since before betrayal became my shadow. I saved every extra cent. I stopped looking at old pictures of Eduardo and Vanessa. The phone stayed silent, but the silence no longer felt like a wound. It felt like space to breathe. Then came an opportunity I had only dared to dream about. A small, abandoned storefront near the market was up for rent. The paint peeled from its wooden door. The windows were clouded with dust. But when I pressed my palm against the glass, I could already see it. Katerina's Corner Bakery, in faded gold letters. The smell of fresh bread spilling onto the street, warmth filling every inch of it. I hesitated. My hands were rough and scarred, my savings barely enough. But I remembered every night I'd cried alone, every word of doubt, every laugh at my expense. My hazel eyes stared back at me in the dusty glass, and I said aloud, "If I fail, at least I fail trying to live, not begging to exist." I signed the lease the next day. My heart pounded as I held the keys, my faded floral dress fluttering in the wind outside that old shop. For the first time in years, my smile wasn't rare or forced. It was real. This was more than bread now. This was reclaiming a life they had thrown away. The bakery opened on a quiet Thursday morning. The golden letters on the door still smelled of fresh paint, the air inside heavy with the scent of warm bread and coffee. I stood behind the counter, my worn beige apron tied snug around my faded floral dress, my rough hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of a dream finally real. Word spread fast. Customers lined up, faces bright with excitement. Some even told me, "Your pão de queijo is the best in town." Each smile, each thank you, stitched my heart back together piece by piece. But then one late afternoon, I saw a shadow in the doorway that froze me in place. Eduardo, my son. He walked in, wearing a crisp suit that smelled of expensive cologne. Vanessa followed behind, heels clicking against the tile floor, a sharp smile on her lips. They looked around, their eyes scanning my bakery like tourists in a place they never believed existed. "Mom," Eduardo said, voice oddly soft. We heard about your business. It's impressive." I stood behind the counter, hands resting on the wood, my old wedding ring glinting under the warm light. My hazel eyes locked on his face. The same boy I had once held through fevers. The same man who had thrown me out when I was broken. Vanessa spoke next, her tone sweet but dripping with calculation. "We're going through a rough time. Eduardo lost his job. Maybe you could, help us out?" Maybe even give him some hours here. For a moment my breath caught. Years of longing for their love clawed at my chest. But then, like a wave pulling back to sea, the pain turned to something colder, stronger. I straightened my posture, gray hair slipping from my messy bun, my face calm but unreadable. "Funny," I said quietly, my voice steady as stone. "When I had nothing, you both had no room for me. Now that I've built something from ashes, you come knocking." Eduardo's eyes flickered with shame. Vanessa's mouth tightened. The silence in my bakery was louder than any shout could ever be. The bakery was quiet, except for the low hum of the oven in the back. I looked at Eduardo and Vanessa standing there, suddenly so small, so uncertain. 1,000 memories rushed through me, birthday candles blown out with joy, lullabies sung late at night, and then that rainy day when they closed the door on me, turning my grief into exile. I could have shouted. I could have thrown every bitter word I'd swallowed back in their faces. But vengeance, I learned, doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. I walked slowly from behind the counter, my rough, flour-dusted hands wiping on my faded apron. I stood close enough to see Eduardo's eyes, the same hazel shade as mine, but clouded with guilt and desperation now. "You know what's worse than being betrayed?" I said softly, my voice low but sharp as broken glass. "It's realizing you once begged for love from people who had none to give." I turned away and stepped to the front window where the golden letters of Katerina's Corner Bakery gleamed in the sunset. My reflection stared back, a woman aged by pain, yes, but standing taller than she ever had before. A woman who had rebuilt herself from nothing with hands the world once mocked. I reached under the counter, pulled out a small envelope and handed it to Eduardo. "There's a job application form," I said, calm and deliberate. "You can fill it out like anyone else. If you're willing to start at the bottom, washing trays and sweeping floors, I'll consider you. But family ties don't buy forgiveness here." Vanessa's face flushed red, ready to protest, but Eduardo grabbed her arm, eyes lowered. They left without another word. As the door closed behind them, the bell chiming softly, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, not revenge, but peace. Because I had finally given myself the love and respect they never could. A week later, I opened the bakery before sunrise as usual. The smell of fresh bread wrapped the air like a promise. I tied my gray, wavy hair into its messy bun, pulled on my faded floral dress, and glanced at the small stack of job applications left on the counter overnight. On top of the pile was one that made my breath hitch. Eduardo's handwriting, his words shaky, hesitant. "I'm willing to do anything. I just want to make things right." For a long moment I stared at that piece of paper, my rough, calloused fingers brushing the edge. Old wounds ached, but something else stirred beneath them, a quiet strength, sharper than forgiveness, deeper than vengeance. I didn't tear the paper. I didn't call him either. I simply folded the form and tucked it away in a drawer, locked it, and slipped the key into my apron pocket. Later that day, as I served a customer, Vanessa passed by outside. She slowed down, staring through the glass at the line of people waiting for my bread. Our eyes met for a split second. Hers were full of pride swallowed by envy, a silent acknowledgement of the life they thought I would never have. I turned away, smiling softly to myself. Not a smile of triumph, but of freedom. I had built something no betrayal could destroy. I had given myself a home, a purpose, a life, and as I slid a tray of golden pão de queijo onto the counter, the bell above the door ringing with each new customer, one truth echoed inside me louder than any apology ever could. They once threw me away. Now they live in the shadow of what I built with my bare hands. Silent justice, that was my ending, and it was enough.